This is the 996 GT2, a car that inherited the widowmaker tag from the 930 Turbo of the 1980s. In today's video, we're going to study why this car is so special and find out if it's as scary to drive as its reputation would lead us to believe. And I very much hope this is the only time in the video me and the car leave the road. Right, I just want to start by saying I have always and forever admired the 996 GT2 from a distance. I have driven one before, it's probably about 4 years ago. It wasn't a very good example. It had 4 old mismatched tyres on. I drove it in the damp. There was a lot of fishtailing going on. There was an awful lot of sweating and swearing going on from inside the car, that's for sure. But yeah, it did pique my interest as a concept and a platform. Now, thankfully, the guys at Paragon never sell cars that are anything like that. So this is, rest assured, a proper example on proper tyres in utterly resplendent condition. Other things to note, and I was warned about this by the guys at Paragon, one of which is Jason, who actually owns not this car, but a 996 GT2 like it. And yeah, his heads up was, they're a little bit grumpy when cold, the 996 GT2. And yeah, I kind of get that, to be honest with you. And certainly while we're bringing the car up to temperature, it's quite interesting to observe that. I was warned that, for example, the shift can just be a little bit, it's not so much notchier, but again, just, you know, require a bit of positivity to a gear shift. This is a low mileage car, yeah, less than 22,000 miles at the time of recording. So it is a low mileage car, which kind of indicates how much use the gearbox has had. So, I mean, I find the gear shift, it's actually really nice, to be honest with you. But if the guys are saying that's going to loosen up a little bit when the gearbox oil gets warm, then yeah, look, very much looking forward to that. The other thing I've noticed is just like coming off the throttle, and I was only kind of resting my right foot on it anyway, but coming off, the car's a little bit more jolty. So yeah, again, you know, the car's just warming up. It doesn't want to do 40 mile an hour anyway, does it? It wants to head towards its top speed of 198 mile an hour. Context is always key. So for us to really understand how special the 996 GT2 is, let's look first of all and have a quick rundown of the 996 Turbo upon which this car is based. So while the 993 Turbo introduced 4-wheel drive and twin turbocharging, the 996 Turbo took that civility one step further. It introduced Tiptronic automatic transmission and also the option of a cabriolet open top 911 Turbo experience. It also, crucially, for context of this car, introduced PSM, Porsche Stability Management. So by the turn of the 996 Turbo, it's fair to say it had cemented the philosophy that was started by the 993 Turbo of being perhaps more of the gentleman's car. If you wanted a leery, rear drive, brute horsepower sports car, you had to look outside of the 911 range. The 996 GT2 took the 996 Turbo base and fettled it to give it that hair-raising drive that perhaps the older cars were known for, and which is probably half the reason why the 996 GT2 inherited the widowmaker tag that was formerly reserved for the 930 Turbo. So the makeup, the philosophy, the DNA, the spec of the GT2 996, what are we talking? Well, it's a genuine Porsche motorsport department car, and as we know, the philosophy there tends to be more power, less weight. How much less weight, first of all? Well, it was a full 100 kilos lighter than the 996 Turbo. Chiefly the weight saving came, of course, by removing the front drive shafts from the 996 Turbo, so therefore the GT2 is rear drive only. Other weight saving measures include rear seat deletion of the electric seats in favour of just the manually adjustable sport back seats or bucket seats. Bucket seats were standard, by the way. These hardback sports seats were a no-cost optional extra. Other weight-saving bits and pieces include deletion of the speakers, as here, a spare wheel in the front, and PSM, Porsche Stability Management. So that does mean there is no stability management on the GT2 at all. I actually think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the last ever Porsche 911 to come without any form of stability management as standard. PCCBs on the 996 GT2 ceramics, The 996 GT2 was the first ever 911 to have ceramics fitted as standard. Not only are they superior in terms of performance and longevity of performance, they're also lighter as well, and again contribute to the 100 kilogram weight saving on the 996 GT2 over the turbo upon which it's based. What about the performance side? Well, the 996 turbo had 420 horsepower and 560 newton meters of maximum torque. The GT2 had 620 newton meters, so an increase of 60 newton meters peak torque over the turbo, and it was also up on power by 42 horsepower to 462, a 10% increase over the turbo. Both cars shared, to all intents and purposes, the same 3.6 litre twin turbocharged flat six. Coded in the turbo N96/70. For the GT2 it was M96/70S. Basically, in terms of differences, that meant slightly larger turbochargers on the GT2, an increase in boost up from 0.85 bar on the turbo to fully 1 bar in the GT2, as well as ECU management tweaks. The GT2 gets slightly wider boots over the turbo. It's 8.5 inches wide. The front wheels, the rears are 11. It means the 996 GT2 has a really unique tyre spec, 315 cross section at the back. Stiffer springs. Again, the aerodynamics have been managed accordingly. We've got a vent at the front of the bonnet to aid downforce at the front, just trying to wedge the nose of the GT2 into the ground a little more. And as you can see behind me as well, the electric adaptive rear wing on the turbo has been ditched in favour of the fixed rear wing on the GT2, which is larger, sits slightly taller. And as you can see, rather ingeniously, those wide struts or uprights have rather large open air intakes, force feeding air into the flat six behind. So the way the GT2 uses airflow or manages airflow, manipulates airflow really, is vastly different to the turbo. It's worth pointing out you had like the normal GT2 variants such as this, which came with buckets or the sport seats. There was also a Club Sport version which came fully FIA prepared. What that means is you've got a 6-point harness, a fire extinguisher and a cage. Also worth pointing out is there is a Gen 1 and a Gen 2 996 GT2. It's not as clear cut as the GT3, so the Gen 1, which is this, obviously didn't have the original fried egg headlights or anything like that. The Gen 2 really was produced for the last year of GT2 production, the last year of 996 production. It's called a facelift, but it's sort of not, because it looks pretty much identical. The big giveaway is the 5-spoke turbo twists fitted to the Gen 1s were replaced for a subtle leaf design. They came on the 996 GT3 and GT3 RS. They're 14 kilos lighter, so it saved an additional 14 kilos in weight, crucially rolling mass, over the turbo. So there was a tweak there. There was also a tweak to the engine, which by now was called M96/70SL. The tweaks to the engine were a lot more extensive. There were new pistons, for example, and that gave 483 horsepower and another uptick in torque. But that's just the top level. As you'd expect with all these different Porsche models, or certainly within the 911 lineage, there are many different smaller intricate changes that kind of contribute towards quite a substantial bigger picture. For example, with the GT2 over the turbo, something that isn't written about a lot is the fact that there's no assistance to the clutch, so therefore the clutch pedal is extremely heavy over the turbo. It's a real genuine workout for my left leg. The shifter itself, I mean, for a start, it's a shorter shift over the stock 996 turbo, but definitely it requires a much more of a positive throw. Kind of feeds into that kind of Porsche motorsport ethos, really, of really positive driving. The next question is, well, how does the GT2 drive? As I mentioned, even at low speeds on the public road, the GT2 is kind of tramlining a hell of a lot more than a turbo ever would, that's for sure. It's really kind of trying to find its own way via the divots in the road. So the Geo is definitely a lot more aggressive. As you'd come to expect from a motorsport car, really, it's not just when cold. Perhaps, again, you know, round town, it's not the most sophisticated thing in the world, but it's not meant to be. It's a rear-wheel drive, lightened Weissach car ultimately. So yeah, look, even now just lifting off the throttle slightly, you can kind of feel that judder through the car where it doesn't like it. But what I will say is, bury the right foot. That really is exceptionally quick in the way it picks up speed. Those bigger, larger twin turbochargers spring into action pretty quickly. I mean, the lag is minimal. There's certainly none of that put your foot down and count to two like there was in the old 930 turbos of the day. Hell's bells! Yeah, I mean, you're going fast quickly, but we're sitting in the mid-range, then push. Yeah, oh, that's really nice. That's really nice. Again, it builds, it's not just that kind of brute force, foot down and smash off into the horizon. The throttle is a lot more delicate than I think anybody has ever given the GT2 credit for, actually. So again, in terms of kind of peeling back the layers of this car, there is a level of sophistication to the GT2 that perhaps hasn't really been picked up on before. I like it, I like it. It'd be easy to say that the setup of this is more in line with the 930 turbos of old, but I mean, that's not entirely accurate. The 930 turbos were single turbocharged. Yes, they were rear wheel drive, but they were fairly heavy as well. But what I will say is, in comparison to the 996 turbo, of course, as I said, is four wheel drive, is the way this car behaves is a little bit more kind of old school. And I basically think it just comes down to the power you're putting through the drivetrain and the way the chassis reacts. The fact is, when you let off the gas, the nose drops. That's not something that happens to anywhere near the same extent in the 996 turbo. The big criticism levied at the 996 GT2 was, of course, that unlike the 993 GT2 beforehand, which was a homologated race car, by the time this car was produced in 2001, the GT2 race series was no longer. So there was no race series for this car to race in. But that's not to say, however, that this car has no motorsport history or integrity. Remember, this is a car that does have the dry-sumped Metzger engine sitting out back, a derivative of the Le Mans winning, no less, 98 GT1 cars that we all know. And again, everybody talks about the pre-991 GT3s having that Metzger engine, the Le Mans engine. Well, look, it's exactly the same here. The only difference is there's two whacking great turbochargers bolted on, amongst other things. I mean, certainly values-wise, like 996 GT2 is ever so slightly above the 996 GT3. But there are far less of these to 996 GT3s. And actually, if you add together total GT2 sales versus GT3 sales, you have one 996 GT2 for every three 996 GT3s. Yes, I know the GT3s are naturally aspirated, and that is kind of a high selling point in Porsche circles. But I often wonder if that kind of motorsport link, which is kind of misunderstood really, plays a little bit of a part in values. I feel like these cars should be appreciated in the marketplace and among enthusiasts far more than they currently are. It's funny because, I mean, refreshingly, I mentioned earlier in the video about how when you start up this car, it's a little bit grumpy, front wheels are tram lining, the shift is, it's definitely not notchy, but a little bit firmer. It's got a heavy clutch. The throttle can be quite jolty, but I mean, look, in tandem with other naturally aspirated motorsport Porsches, push on and all of those nuances really start to make sense. That aggressive geo turns into a really fast, sharp, direct steer. Likewise, the gearbox and the shift, it really responds well to a fast, positive shift. Twinned with the lovely pedal placing that the 996 has anyway, makes for a really nice heel and toe. And again, the car responds really well to that. So if you're brave enough and you really grab this car by the scruff of its neck, it definitely does respond to that. It does feel fast, and it is fast. There's absolutely no question about that. Still a formidable car, a car that can intimidate you. And do you know what? I think there should be a degree of that. The whole point, especially a car like this, a car that's high on entertainment, it should demand and command your respect when jumping into it. There we have it. that is the review of, well, the remarkable 996 GT2. Formidable, yes. Fearsome, not to the extent that its reputation would have us believe. Absolutely, without any question or any doubt, there's so much brute power in the 996 GT2's performance credentials, but it's by no means a one-trick pony. And actually, what I've realised today is there's a real kind of tactility to this car and to driving this car that it's just not given the credit for at all. If not undervalued, it's certainly underrated in the world of Porsche. What it lacks with the preciseness of its naturally aspirated Weissach brothers in the GT3s, it more than makes up for by melding that turbocharged 911 experience with something that's just a little bit more focused and something that moves away from the more gentlemanly turbos of the 996 range up to the present day. A Porsche I've been dying to spend some time with for a while now. I've not been disappointed. The 996 GT2 is without question one of the highlights of the 996 range. Rarer than a GT3 equivalent and a manual rear-wheel drive Porsche capable of very nearly 200 miles an hour. It's going to be very interesting to see where these things go in the future. Thanks to Paragon for the loan of the exquisite car. You can find it on the Nineworks Marketplace and on Paragon GB's website, paragongb.com. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.